Content warnings for the following: sexism, discussions on sexual violence, discussions of violence, references to suicide. If you struggle with these topics, please, I don't mind, click away or watch with a trusted friend. Additionally, due to the themes in this video, I'm going to put a strong parental guidance warning on this. That being said, onto the video. On the 3rd of March 2021, Sarah Everard, a marketing executive from Brixton, went missing in Clapham on her way home from work, with her last known location being Clarence Avenue. It has been widely accepted that she has been murdered, but because this is still an ongoing case, I can't say who did it, but her body was formally identified using dental records. What I can say is this: a police officer with the Metropolitan Police Service has been arrested on suspicion of her murder, but for legal reasons I will not be referring to him as the murderer. Sarah's case is not unique. She did nothing wrong, and in fact, by all accounts, she did everything that she could possibly have done to keep herself safe, and yet she was still murdered. Sarah wore bright identifiable clothing on the night that she disappeared. She was in contact with her partner, and the fact that she didn't stay in regular contact that night was seen as concerning, and that was why they filed the missing persons report. In addition to all this, Sarah walked by CCTV cameras and on a brightly lit street, and yet she is now dead. Why is that? She did everything that women are told to do. Why are women told to do that in the first place? Why should they need to? Why is the burden for a crime placed on the victim? Sexism. Let's explore that together, and to help me illustrate my point a little more clearly, I recorded myself walking late at night. If I'm not afraid, then women should also not be afraid to do so. So let this video serve as what the default should be. Tragically, it's not. Part 1. Why offence isn't always the best defense. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a strong advocate for people to learn to defend themselves. It's great exercise, and it's a chance to meet a lot of people. To prove I'm not talking rubbish, I am a registered black belt, even if I've not been practicing for about half a decade at this point. I even checked before making this video, I am in fact still on the register, even though I've stopped paying for my license renewal and also my membership. I want to talk about something that my master instructor said to me while I was in training. For context, this guy is like a 5th dan black belt, so he definitely knew his stuff. Anyways, he said to me, and in fact the class, knowing all this stuff is great. I can teach you how to disarm someone. I can teach you how to use their weapon against them. But if someone has a weapon, always run if you can. There is nothing cowardly about running. There's a reason he said this. Sure, I may know the theory of how to disarm someone with a pistol or a knife or any number of weapons. I may know how to use them, minus the pistol. This is the UK after all. But real life is messy. Things don't go how you plan them to go. You make a wrong move, and you could die. Or at least seriously injure yourself. He maintained this mentality throughout. Fighting is messy, things go wrong. And if you have to fight, then fight. But aim to always get out. Aim to run if you can. That was his mindset. So why am I telling you all this? One way women are dismissed from accusations of abuse is by telling them that they should learn to defend themselves. This is usually by people who either have zero fighting experience or are new to the whole world of fighting, and think that they're the bee's knees. It's really just a power fantasy. Telling women, or for that matter anyone, to learn to fight because it'll stop this happening again, isn't only stupid, it's actively harmful. The first reason for this is it relays to the person that it's their fault. It's not. If someone is attacking you, it's not your fault. I don't know why I have to say this, but yet I still see these sorts of comments. The second reason it's harmful is that it could potentially put the person in a false sense of security. So if it did happen again, that they would engage and fight, even if they had the opportunity to escape. And look, I'm not saying it can't genuinely benefit your mental health. It can. It can help you overcome negative perceptions of yourself and provide genuinely healthy ways of overcoming traumas that you've had, as A.G. Vargas suggests in their PhD thesis. In my life, I've only ever had to use my so-called skills once. And that was a throw, to de-escalate a situation where someone was charging at me. I even offered to help them up afterwards. Full-fat combat is not a viable defense strategy. So can we please be done with the victim blaming of, oh, well, if she knew MMA, then she'd be fine now? No, she wouldn't. And she might need your support right now. Your comments aren't helpful and they're making it difficult for this person to tackle their trauma. Now, I don't know if Sarah knew any self-defense, but I can almost guarantee to you that that crowd will be out and about when the autopsy results become public. Another point I want to touch upon is she was wearing regular clothes. Part 2. Primarni special. Clothing is often also cited, specifically in sexual abuse cases. Is there any link to what women wear versus their propensity to get sexually assaulted? In short, no, like zero evidence. But if you need more convincing, then fine. A review in 2014 found that more revealing clothing comes with increased levels of self-objectification, as well as objectification from others, i.e. a short dress on a woman means that she's perceived as more willing and more sexually experienced. There hasn't been a study or review that suggests that it correlates to more violence, though. Hell, a law review back in 1993 advised that the law should make steps to prevent clothing being entered as evidence in the court, because jury members will believe that women can contribute to their own victimization through their clothing choices, even though, and I quote, such inferences have been shown to be inaccurate. Interesting side note, the two studies share two authors, a decade apart, and they still have to fight for this. There is a reason that the manner of dress doesn't matter. As T.M. Boehner wrote in 2007, sexual harassment is about power. Therefore, a target who is dressed provocatively is not an ideal target for a would-be harasser. Further writing, provocative dress doesn't necessarily signify submissiveness, but instead may be an indication of confidence and assertiveness. Even as far back as the 80s, a time where you might expect there to be more sexist researchers, E.M. Edmonds et al. Didn't attribute sexiness of a woman to indicate that they were more likely to be sexually assaulted. What they would commit to, however, was that there was a general assumption that a woman is more culpable for crimes committed against her in the event that she looks more attractive. But they suggested that this is, quote, cultural bias, which is what T.L. Lennon et al. Was talking about. That was in the 1980s, yet we still have this discussion to this day. To this day, people still ask, what were they wearing? And say things like they were asking for it if they were wearing something revealing. There is no debate. These perceptions are not only sexist, but incorrect. Women don't get assaulted more when they wear more sexualized clothing. We just think that they do. Everyone should have the right to wear what they want. Obviously making sure they abide by indecent exposure laws, but women should feel comfortable in what they wear, and not be told that they're asking for it, or being harassed for showing a little bit too much leg. I don't know about you, but I think it's time that we got rid of all these preconceived notions, and stop victim blaming people who need our support. All it does is hurt people, and their impressions of their self-worth. And that's if they haven't been assaulted. I dread to think what it would be like if you had been assaulted, and the public at large was saying things like, well, with a dress like that, there's no wonder. Or every time you log onto Facebook, you see your face in the local news, or maybe even the nationals. So you click on the comments to see what people are saying. You know you shouldn't, but you think maybe, just maybe, the public are on my side this time. And you see comments describing you as a slut, or likening you to a woman of the night. Now, I want you to think about someone else reading that. Maybe your daughter. Or maybe just a woman in your life that you care about. You may even agree with some of those comments, but think what that's doing to the women in your life. Women are told to look pretty, but not too pretty as to intimidate others. To dress smart, but not so smart as to look bossy and unapproachable. There is no winning, and it's time that we as a society took a stand against it. A milkshake is slutty. A person is human. See, damn it, now I want a Five Guys milkshake. Part 3. Grace and other cases. Look, I don't want you to get the impression that all sexism leads directly to physical violence. It doesn't, but all sexism is violence. And to illustrate this, I'd like to look at 3 cases. One well-known, and the other from friends of mine who have let me tell their stories. Obviously for my friends, I will be anonymizing their names using character names from my favourite book, Artemis by Andy Weir. But we'll start with Grace. Grace Millane was murdered while on holiday in New Zealand. She was raped and murdered by a man that she met off of Tinder. The jury heard testimony that she was killed accidentally due to complications with consensual sex. Thankfully, the jury rejected this. Maybe it's because given the other evidence that was extremely unlikely. People, generally speaking, don't need to hire a carpet cleaner after consensual sex. Grace was murdered in the most horrific way. And the worst part? This wasn't even the killer's first victim. But thanks to Grace, more women came out to talk about what the killer had done to them. Grace died because of sexual violence. She trusted the man. She went on a date with him. She went on a date with him after meeting him on a dating app. And he murdered her. With stories like Grace's, it's no wonder that women are afraid with online dating. 15% of women said that they were involved with a conversation that made them feel uncomfortable in a study by Kapusky. This was compared to only 10% of men. And then, when Sky News spoke to the National Crime Agency's head investigator, S. Sutton, he said that 40% of stranger rape cases are from people going home with their date on their first date. This was in 2019. So let's look at the national crime statistics to see what proportion of men versus women are involved in stranger rape cases. Now, I couldn't find anything from 2019. However, a set from 2017 states that in a sample of people between the ages of 16 and 59, 3.1% of women had experienced a sexual assault in the last year, versus only 0.8% of men. And estimates that 1 in 5 women have experienced some form of sexual assault since the age of 16. It's pretty obvious to me who the real issue is. It's us, men, and we need to be better. Later on in the video, I'm going to suggest some policy changes that I think could potentially assist. Some changes that might help make women feel more comfortable when they're having to walk home at night. Make them feel a little safer. But first, I'd like to share the stories of my friends. These are stories that women listening to right now might have experienced. And I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want the men watching this to understand these stories, to take them in, really take them in. And I want you to understand that stories like Grace's and Sarah's are not that uncommon, but also that less extreme and still serious forms of sexism exist in everyday life. The next 2 stories are from 2 women who didn't get murdered. They're still alive and well. But their stories won't leave them. One is a pretty typical case of workplace harassment, and the other is a story that might seem extreme, but my guess is that both will resonate with a lot of women watching right now. The first story is from Loretta Sanchez, who describes a time at work where she was verbally harassed by her boss. She was made to feel like nothing, and like she didn't understand her job. She didn't report it, and said that in hindsight, it was likely because she felt intimidated out of reporting it. So instead, she just carried on, day after day, coming home in tears because of the abuse of her boss. Not one of her co-workers called out her boss's actions. And nothing ever happened to him over this. Now, as far as I'm aware, this wasn't a case of sexual harassment, but it easily could have been. According to Statista, who are a great resource for compiling stats and data, in 2019, 13% of women in the United Kingdom's workforce experienced workplace sexual harassment within 12 months of the study being done. But this story isn't about sexual harassment. This story is about the culture that we as a society have fostered that allows men to think that they can get away with all sorts of behaviour and think that it is in any way acceptable. Men need to call out other men's poor behaviour because it makes women feel deeply uncomfortable, dehumanised, demoralised, and distraught. And because of that, women aren't likely to call men out. And when they do, they are dismissed as being bossy or loud. So it forced us men to A, not be so awful at work and in general awful, and B, to call out other men when they're being like that. The second story comes from Jazz Bashir. She wanted to share how she's had multiple inappropriate remarks made to her and around her. She's been catcalled in public. She's been told at work not to bend over and that, I quote, "You look like you'd be good in bed." She's been honked at by passing cars. While she was on holiday in Peru, a taxi driver tried to kiss her because she told him she wasn't married. And for the next one, I'm just going to post a picture of the text that she sent me, because I think it conveys more of the "I'm done with this" emotion than my words ever could. But in short, she said she's been slut-shamed. She recounts how people assume that she's weak because she's short, blonde, and a woman, and everyone assumes she needs help. She's been ignored in favour of her male colleagues in at least 2 separate workplaces she's worked. And then there's the stuff that's really dangerous. Whilst on nights out, she's been groped. She's had men put their hand up her skirt, and the man, after not taking no for an answer, wouldn't stop until she threatened to call the police. When she shouted at him after, his friends just said, quote, "That's just what he's like when he's drunk." Then a slightly lighter one that she told me was that she was once tried to be bought. I say lighter because she sent it with a laughing emoji, but let's be real, that casual sexism is extremely harmful still. Jazz's experience ranges from casual sexism that makes life uncomfortable to fearing for her life. This is what I mean when guys don't call out other guys. And look, it's not all guys. But imagine you walk out of your house and every time you open that door, an anvil has a 1 in 10 chance of dropping on your head. Would you leave your house? That's a lot of weight on your shoulders. You'd be perfectly in your rights to be afraid. Because even if you survived, you'd have scars. You'd remember it. For life as a time that an anvil dropped on you just for walking outside. Then people would look at you and stare. And it might not be because of the anvil, but you're going to think that it's because of that. And that feeling is going to haunt you. And it's going to haunt you for life. Even with therapy, you'll still remember yourself as the person who got anviled. You'd look up every time you walked out of a door. Maybe you'd even wish you'd been killed. Or maybe you would have just been killed on that day. Part 4. The police response. If you follow this channel's discussion feed, and you should, it's like my Twitter feed but with no swearing, it'll come as no surprise to you that I am deeply disappointed with the police's response. They had a chance to build bridges that have been damaged by police for not keeping women safe, for not taking rape allegations seriously. Now don't get me wrong, the case with Sarah was handled quickly and with dignity, but the same cannot be said for the aftermath. The police have allowed BLM protesters. They allowed anti-COVID rallies. They even allowed football hooliganry. But a woman who was killed by one of their own, possibly the most important one of them in terms of optics, they rejected. And they rejected it with force. Women were manhandled and placed in handcuffs, carted away. They showed up to mourn the murder of an innocent woman. Sure, some showed up with protest signs, but I personally don't think that this is what this was ever supposed to be about. Outside the voice of hundreds of women's silence and the power that that has in a time like this. And it is a powerful voice. Like, I'm not too proud to admit that I cried a little seeing the scenes. But then I got angry. And I added this entire section because of that one night. Because watching police storm in, and I mean storm in, pushing mourners aside to get to the bandstand, and then manhandling mourners, throwing them to the ground, putting them in cuffs. I'd think I was describing a terrorist attack in a park, but I was describing a vigil. It was disgusting at a massively disproportionate level of force. The police should have been there for sure, but they should have stood back and made sure that the vigil goers were safe. Instead, they attacked civilians armed with flowers. Crescenda Dick, resign. Under your watch, your officers attacked civilians who were mourning. And instead of calling them out and reprimanding the officers for their vile actions, you instead stood by them. in the most dismissive way, stating, "We're still in a pandemic. An unlawful gathering is an unlawful gathering." Okay, Crescinda, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the unlawful part of that. Now, I'm no lawyer or a paralegal and have zero experience with UK law, so this part is basically an interpretation that I've read into, and it's not legal advice. Under UK Statutory Instrument 2020/907, Part 2, Section 5, Subsection B, in references to places COVID restriction applies versus doesn't apply. Quote, "Land satisfies this condition if it is a public outdoor space which is not for the following: A, operated by a business, a charitable, benevolent, or philanthropic institution or public body as a visitor attraction, or B, part of the premise used for the operation of a business, charitable, benevolent, or philanthropic institution or public body." Now, I'd argue that the public park Clapham Common was involved in a benevolent act, and thus is protected by this. Benevolent institutions are defined by UK law in the Charities Act of 2006, Chapter 47, Section 1, as, quote, "a charity or institution established for charitable, benevolent, or philanthropic means." It's circular and vague, but it's something. The Clapham Vigil was organised under the Reclaim These Streets banner, and thus, if they were, say, a charity or benevolent institution, then it could be argued that this vigil itself was a benevolent act. So, what is Reclaim These Streets about? They are, as far as I'm concerned, a decentralised special interest group aimed at making streets safer for women, which I think is a very benevolent thing. And if you want to argue the charity angle instead, after the police rejected their application for the vigil, they raised £200,000 for various women's charities. And this was a direct response to the event being cancelled, but not as a reaction to the police's response that night. That fundraiser is now sitting at a little over $500,000, and in fact, by the time I'm recording this, is probably even higher than that, from a profile called Reclaim These Streets. I think it's fair to say that they are a charitable organisation, and thus any arrests made would be unlawful. Additionally, similar protest happened in Lincoln when I was still a student there, and thus there is also a precedent for them doing benevolent acts prior to COVID, if you also wanted to raise that as a counter-argument. Additionally, the right to protest is protected by domestic and international law, according to the CPS, who are the state's official prosecutory service. Well, post-completion note here. That's not true anymore, is it? The UK government banned the right to protest. You should be ashamed of yourself, Westminster. This is a blatant and unapologetic human rights violation. I implore you to roll back this bill. End of post-completion note. Now, I'm not a lawyer though, so I might be missing something. Either way, Crescinda Dick, step down. Or you'll be voted out come the locals anyway. You've got this wrong. Admit that and keep some of your dignity. Something your officers didn't allow the women to have on that night. Part 5. Suggestions going forward. So where do we go from here? How do we make things safer for women? Well, we can start as men by not being so casually sexist. And if people are casually sexist, call them out on it. Go back to Jazz's story for a moment. Do you think she felt safe after hearing he's just like that when he's drunk? Or do you think she felt even more unsafe? Or Loretta's story. If her co-workers called her boss out, do you think she might have found it easier to speak out? This isn't a matter of we'll do it less. No. We have to stop this. Finished. Done. Over. There is no room for wiggling. Because that wiggle room allows people back in who are deeply sexist. The second thing is, Parliament, make misogyny a hate crime. I literally cannot believe it's not. It's a simple thing you can do with a massive consequence. Thirdly, teach consent in school. There seems to be a little bit of debate as to where to teach it. If you want my personal opinion, I think Year 7 would be the prime location to teach them. They have a lot of new information coming into them. They've just moved into a new school. I think this is the time that you could make the most impact. But in reality, consent's not a difficult concept. It's really simple. Here, I'll give you a 5-point crash course. Number 1, no means no. Number 2, yes means yes at this moment. Number 3, maybe means stop pressuring me. I don't feel like doing it right now, but ask me later. They may also say maybe, but don't do insert something here, which means they're up for it. It sounds fun, but they may very quickly change their mind, and you need to respect that. Number 4, check in with your partner. Things as simple as, is this okay, or I'm not hurting you. Or just something to A, make sure that they're still into it and still want this, and B, to make sure that they know that they can say no. Number 5, if they say stop, you stop. It doesn't matter how into it you are, your partner has said stop, not stop in a little bit, not stop when you like, stop. They have the right to withdraw consent, as do you. The next thing you can do is, instead of uniformed police officers handling cases of sexual abuse or domestic violence, have a plainclothes officer deal with it instead. It might make women feel more comfortable coming forward. I have seen that the government has responded and said that they will add plainclothes police officers in bars and nightclubs, and I think that's a very good idea, but I don't think that's anywhere near close to enough, and we need to do more. The next thing is get women into power. I'm talking cabinet positions, I'm talking CEOs, I'm talking mayors, I'm talking MPs. When the ballot paper comes up, don't just dismiss a candidate because they're a woman. And that goes for women too. Get involved. Even if it's just your local fundraiser or running for a councillor of your local ward, get involved. Men, stop following women so closely. Look, I've been guilty of this too, but it can make them feel uncomfortable and afraid. And I hope, given this video, that's for obvious reasons. Just slow down your pace a little bit, let them build up some distance, and then just keep going. It's not difficult, and it makes a world of difference. A little random one that my dad taught me. But if you're getting into a taxi home, then drop the women off first, even if it'll cost more. Next one, walk your female friends home. Let them know that they can call you if they're walking home at night, and they want someone on the other side in case that they do get kidnapped. Look, this isn't going to change overnight, and it's going to take some time. In the meantime, let them know that you care. Next one, listen to your friends when they come out about abuse. It might seem difficult at first, but it's tenfold as hard for them. I'll tell you what I normally do to make it a little easier if it happens to you, so you don't get caught like a deer in headlights. But that being said, I've only had to have this conversation, I think, with 2 people, so I might be off base. If I am, let me know in the comments. I'll make amendments where I can. Number 1, let them come to you. They might not want to tell you everything all at once, and they might not be able to. Number 2, don't talk unless there's a natural break or that it's crucial that you do talk. Number 3, signpost but don't enforce. What I mean by that is let them know who they can talk to about it, i.e. the police or social services, but don't demand that they do. Number 4, if they are talking to you, they trust you, and they likely want to tell you everything, but it might take days, and respect that. 5, I personally try to avoid phrases like, are you okay? I don't know, given the context, it just feels a little bit condescending, and I don't think you need to prove that you're being sympathetic since you're talking to them about such a sensitive topic. They know that you're on their side. And number 6, don't treat them differently. Like, if you have a relationship that has a lot of insulting jokes aimed at each other, sometimes this is referred to as banter, be careful about the jokes that you do make, but still have a laugh with them. It might make them feel more normal. It's just knowing where that line is. And if you can make them feel comfortable with that, then they're going to be more willing to talk to you. Again, it is knowing where that line is though. And obviously if they tell you to stop, then just stop. Now look, I've been guilty of being sexist too. I once told a female friend, welcome to the adult life, after a girl I was dating put a hole through her wall. Would I have said that to a male friend? Probably not. I was 19, but it was still really condescending and demeaning. And in hindsight, she totally does have a justified reason to be mad. Again, you know who you are, and I'm sorry. To round this off, it falls to men to make this world safer for women, because we are a huge problem to them. I hope that some of my points have helped you understand what women go through on a near daily basis. And remember the anvil. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it'll put you in the right ballpark.